how much time do we have left?
2.5 minutes.
I think I'm going to leave it there for now because I'd like us to get into some actual serious concrete examples before I start duking it out with David.
Okay.
Let's take, I wanted to complete this at our first round here. The question, which certainly can be puzzling, why was there not much in the way of contemporary recognition? Well, there was actually, but not by the status quo or the establishment. Why? Why would some no-count guy that the failed rebellion be mentioning Jesus wasn't? Well, those guys weren't a threat to the established order. You read through the Gospels, you see page after page, they saw him as a threat. And they were not about to give him the time of day, to even acknowledge that he existed. Not only, yes, certainly you could say, did they have an interest in it? Yes, but that would have been contrary to their purposes, because to acknowledge him would be to acknowledge his message and that he's valid. For example, the resurrection. Now, there's reports by various people of the resurrection, the resurrected saints. Well, they had to hush that up in a hurry, because if they acknowledged it, they will be stoned by their people as, murdering the Messiah. And so guess what they did? And this is actually in the record here. They circulated a story. Well, his disciples stole his body. It's to their advantage to say that. They're not going to acknowledge anything that would give any credibility to this guy. Two reasons, as we find in the book of John chapter 11, the high priest said, they'll take away our position. We won't have influence and power anymore. We've got to silence this guy. That's one reason right there, And secondly, self-preservation. Because thousands and thousands of the common people, and even of the wealthy people and the influential people, believed. But it was not recognized by the status quo. And there is a very good and reasonable explanation of why you don't have anything in the Jewish records there. As for the Romans, yeah, well, that's the Roman Empire. And of course, to the Greeks and the Romans, resurrection was foolishness, as Paul the Apostle said. They would not buy into resurrection. That's nonsense. So not until decades later, when Christianity was growing and started to have an impact, then you have people taking notice. But initially, some nondescript beggar teacher over there, they say resurrected, bah humbug, nonsense. So yeah, that is a very important consideration there to think about. There's two reasons. Now, let's take an example of lack of knowledge of the source material. My esteemed colleague here mentions the day of Jesus' death on the cross, and he says there's a conflict. Says one account says it was the Passover, the other says it was the day before the Passover. No, it doesn't. It says it was a preparation of the day before the Sabbath. The Greek word is ton Sabbaton, which is the weekly Sabbath. That's the seventh day or Saturday. So it's the week before, it's the day before the Sabbath, the preparation day. That is also the Passover. So there's no conflict, just two different explanations of the same day. Another example of a lack of basic knowledge of even reading the subject material is the claim there's a conflict in the accounting of miracles of Jesus in John chapter 2 versus John chapter 4, where the author says that in John chapter 2 says this is his first miracle, and then a little bit later down it says there were more miracles, and then in chapter 4 this is his second miracle. The author says, here's a conflict, right in the same author. No, it isn't. It says, after he came to Galilee from Judea, he went back and forth. There's no conflict there in the slightest there. So, once again, I could give 3 or 4 or half a dozen more examples like that. I could actually take a month and go through and point out every single point where there have been personal inferences, assumptions, opinions, suppositions, evidence of bias, and a paradigm. Maybe I'll do that, but it would take probably about a month of my time to do that. And I can certainly do that. So basically, the author has here deified or dignified his own personal paradigm from a certain standpoint and interpreted all the evidence within the parameters or framework of that paradigm, and then claims that that is fact, but it's not. It's simply the paradigm of the author.
We have 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
1 30-second.
Yes, thank you, because that's what I needed to hear, is what you exactly respond to. The idea that there was a cover-up from the Sanhedrin is ridiculous for many reasons. First of all, how would they have the power to cover up such a huge thing if this was dead people from history were getting out of their graves and wandering out through Jerusalem? How could they get away with saying something like, oh, the disciples stole his body while the Roman guard slept? Roman guards were killed for sleeping on duty. They would not have gone to the Sanhedrin in the first place to say, what should we tell the people? And if they had gone to sleep, and this is in a case that only Matthew tells us about anyway, nobody else mentions a guard at the gate, at the tomb. They wouldn't have gone to the Jewish priests, they would have gone to their Roman commanders. There's absolutely no reason for the ridiculous things that's said in this account. And for the thought that the status quo, the leaders were more worried about the PR spin than the fact that the son of their God had actually come back from the dead and was alive. I think they'd be worried about that much more than how are we going to cover this up, you know. As for the day of preparation versus the day of Passover, you're simply incorrect. That is not true. It is a separate day. One is the 14th of Nisan, one is the 15th of Nisan, and all the Gospels are saying that this was a Friday.
30 seconds.
The other thing is Markan priority and the synoptic problem. This is something that's been the majority opinion of biblical scholars for well over 100 years, and that is that all 4 Gospels derive ultimately from the first one, Mark. The synoptic problem is that Mark, Matthew, and Luke all read from each other because they are taken 55% of Mark in the case of Luke and 90% of Mark in the case of Matthew, and have copied it verbatim, word for word.
Okay, 2 minutes.
Okay, yeah, actually, no. There's certainly very important reasons, and it's in the source materials itself, said that the Jewish leadership had threatened people with excommunication and imprisonment if they acknowledge Jesus as Messiah. And that happened. They threw them out of the synagogue, and they did worse. They put them in prison, they killed them. The Roman guards is actually very simple to understand. Yes, they realized that it would be their heads for falling asleep on the job. The priests, you find actually in this account, bought them off with a large sum of money and bought off Pilate with a large sum of money. Otherwise, they'd be executed. But it was so critical for their survival to fabricate a story and circulate it, just as the record says here. And that is certainly a valid consideration to think about. Now, I'd like to also talk about preparation. I've done the exegetical research. That is Friday, the day of the crucifixion. There's no disagreement on that in the slides in any of the 4 Gospels. They all say the same thing. One says the day before the Sabbath. The other talks about the Passover taking place. So I'll be glad to go toe-to-toe on that one. We got a Greek New Testament here. After we're done here, no problem at all. So basically, going on here to some other examples here, different accounts in the Gospel.
30 seconds.
Okay, different accounts in the Gospels. Well, they're different perspectives. If I take this gentleman right here and ask 10 people to tell one thing about him and not tell each other, just write it down, do you think they'd all say the same thing? One will say he's got a beard. Another will say he's wearing glasses. Another will say he's got hair that's this and this color. Another would say he's tall, and so forth. So you have 4 different witnesses that are each giving different perspectives on what they saw. One of them is pretty...
Time's up.
And this has been the fastest 5 minutes and 2 minutes in my life, I have to say. I don't actually know of any verse where it says that they were able to buy off Pilate. That's new to me. But in any case, they could not, as Roman guards, you simply could not get your way out of that. And we should go toe-to-toe on all these events. So much and so little time. you talk about these four different perspectives, and that is not the case we get with the Gospels at all. We have one perspective, Mark's, which is plagiarized by Matthew and Luke. And this is not some heretical notion. This is not my crazy crackpot notion. It's not an atheist notion. That is the majority opinion of all biblical historians across the board for well over 200 years, that they all took Mark's basic story and they added material here, they tweaked it here. Matthew, in fact, corrects lots of Mark's mistakes about basic facts about Judaism. John himself doesn't even try to keep up with Mark, Matthew, or Luke. He completely goes his own separate way. And in fact, if you are impressed by the details in the crucifixion, you really need to read the difference between Mark's account of the crucifixion and John's. Because if you read the weeks beforehand, Mark has them hiding out.
30 seconds.
They're completely different by week by week. One of them has Jesus coming to Jerusalem for the first time, followed by a huge multitude of people. The other one has him going back and forth for 3 years from Jerusalem and hiding out in the wilderness of Judea just before Passover. They're totally detailed, yes, and they're totally irreconcilable. They don't even try to make up. And for the longest time, scholars have recognized that these are deliberate contradictions. They're not accidental.
Another illustration of bias, and that is to accept source criticism as fact, but it's not. It's a theory. Each of these things that have been mentioned are easily explained and understood without having to resort to source criticism. I'd like to comment also on the whole concept of plagiarizing. Well, this again is an example of bias there. I'm very familiar with the details. Now, the problem appears to be a common one, and that is to attempt to superimpose a Western mindset upon Oriental writers. A Western mindset is chronological, A, B, C, D, E. This happened, this happened. Gospels don't do that. They jump all over the place. Their emphasis is not chronology, it's on significance of the event itself. And the Hebrew reminder writing style operated in terms of a chiasmos oftentimes. You start here, you jump there, you go there, you jump there. But each of these authors had a specific emphasis illustrated by the whole concept of lion, ox, eagle, and man. 4 different aspects of Jesus Christ. Each brought out a different aspect there. So therefore, once you understand how the author's intent, and not try to superimpose your own paradigm upon an author 2,000 years ago in a different culture, which is a part of exegesis, then it starts to make sense. And again, remember the famous saying by Louis XIV, "L'état c'est moi."
30 seconds.
And that is what happened with the leadership. Yeah, we are the state. If we lose our office, the whole nation is going to perish. It's right there in John 11. You say the pie that can be bought off, money talks, folks. Money talked then, money talks now. Sure, money talks. A great sum of money to buy off the Roman general and Governor Pilate, but money talks. And he knew his head was in the, at risk too, because if the people had come to realize...
Time's up. Okay, you have 1
The
minute.
differences we have in the Gospels aren't on the level of Luke says he was wearing a red shirt and Matthew says he was wearing a blue shirt. These are profound differences in everything before his life to after his death and everything in between. Profound differences in the way that he approaches life and the way he teaches. There's also many indications that they are stealing from Mark. One of them is called intercalation. They take a passage from Mark. Mark likes to sandwich passages with different scenes. What happens, so he'll be starting one scene, cut to another scene arbitrarily, and go to another scene. That's perfectly fine, there's nothing wrong with it, except that Matthew and Luke, when they copy Mark, they also copy that arbitrary thing. So it's not supposition, it's not my bias, it's not my own idea that they stole from Mark, it's simply a historical fact. The paradigm that I'm imposing is that paradigm.
Okay, 1 minute.
Basically then, in summary, so if you take the data as they appear and do a decent job on your research, let's take for example the going back